what are APMs?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess you could look at this historically. There are many different ways and actually many different definitions of an APM. I think if you go back historically, maybe as early as the 1950s when diners introduced the first universal credit card, and in fact through that period right the way through to the early 2000s, credit cards were the alternative to cash. And in fact actually some financial institutions on the web today at sourcing all of this sort of data still determine AMOPs, alternative methods of payments, as payments other than cash. But actually probably Wikipedia has probably got a closer definition, and they talk about payment methods that are alternative to credit cards. In terms of PPRO, our definition is probably a little bit more refined to that. And in fact, actually, it depends where you are in the world and what your cultural preference is, determining whether it's an alternative payment method or not. But the way that we see it is all payment methods outside of credit cards, international credit cards, so with the exception of Visa, MasterCard, Diners, Amex, etc., everything else is an alternative payment method. And a good example of that maybe is in the Netherlands, where the prevalence of bank transfer is so high. In fact, 70% of all of the online purchases are made using bank transfer in the Netherlands. You could argue that the alternative method of payment is actually a credit card.
Well, that's quite a nice rounded definition of what an alternative payment method is and how it's almost localized.
Yeah.
So how do they work in the context of Europe?
Well, certainly in the context of Europe, there's a significant diversity of different payment methods. You could probably categorize those in 4 or 5 groups. Certainly e-wallets and bank transfers in Europe are very prevalent. There is a little bit of cash, a diminishing number of checks, although even that in the US, as an example, is still relatively prevalent. And you also have local cards, local and credit cards as well in there. So maybe sort of turning firstly to e-wallets. E-wallets, certainly in Europe, with PayPal as an example, there is a relatively high use, although that differs from market to market. But every corner of the world, especially in Asia, e-wallets are very prevalent and are growing fast. If you think about Alipay and WeChat as a good example. The emerging markets effectively there, where the economy has grown so fast and that the use of mobile has sort of bypassed banking, which meant that actually e-wallets, the use of the mobile, etc., has outpaced them. There's probably around about a 24% market share that they have in Europe in that respect. It's effectively use on the mobile, whereby you're actually using it with a funding method from your bank card, so it's a direct funding, or topping it up with an alternative payment method in there.
So how do you kind of break down what is actually a payment method and what is effectively like a GUI for a payment method, i.e. I use Apple Pay, it's basically the front end of using a card?
Yeah, there are a number. Obviously, you've got Samsung Pay, Google Pay, etc., and that is the front end. So for those, we would still classify those as a traditional payment method, because it's effectively your bank card that you're using. It is just a collection of bank cards that you've got onto your wallet there. Where we have differences in that respect, that you've got different funding methods onto other e-wallets that you have as well. And for example, using barcodes, QR codes, PIN codes, etc., and actually with biometrics now, making faster payments with e-wallets is significantly more convenient and secure as well.
And then just to go into a little bit more around the cash side of things, it seems there's quite a difference in Europe, because you have Sweden always talking about how they're looking to go cashless, and then Germany, which is a very different kettle of fish.
That's true, yeah. In Sweden, actually, the percentage of cash used for online purchases is down to 1% now, and they're probably the first, certainly European market, where cash will disappear from online purchasing in there. There are different methods in Scandinavia, in particular Sweden, where there is a preference to actually pay later, i.e. on receipt of goods, or if it's a big ticket item in instalments, and hence the reason products like Klarna have grown very fast in there. In Germany, cash is relatively low, although people do like cash. People have an aversion to debt, but bank transfer is actually the predominant method in there. It's around about half of all of online transactions are made using online bank transfers in Germany. Cash has a little foothold, is around about 7% of all of European online purchases are made using cash. There is a small population in Europe that is unbanked, and therefore obviously they would need to find a means of buying goods online. So through cash-based methods such as Multibanco or PaySafe Card, they can do that. There are other reasons, of course. Some people prefer anonymity in there for whatever reason. Or indeed some people might be a little bit more sensitive to security and therefore have a preference not to putting their personal details online.
Just to break that down a little bit further, Europe compared to say Asia or Africa, the euro is still the #1 currency across the whole continent. Yeah. Does that have much of an impact in terms of alternate payment methods, i.e. not having to do currency conversions, etc.?
It certainly does. I mean, you've got 19 European member states that use the euro through SEPA. So bank transfer in particular, that method makes a significantly seamless, more simple process in terms of being able to do cross-border within the European zone.
The other thing that I kind of want to highlight about Europe is there isn't a reliance on a single payment method. So if something happens, most parts of civilization can still function.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, you have around about 95% of the population of Europe have a bank account. The vast majority of that have access to the internet, but many of those people will have a number of different payment methods within their wallet. So they'll have a debit card, they'll have a credit card, they'll be able to do online banking, they will be able to have easy access to be able to do a cash-based transaction if they wanted to as well. So very diverse in Europe, as it is in Asia as well, maybe less so in the US for consumers.